Hi, everyone. How are you? Thank you for coming. I hope everybody had a chance to have a little lunch and is feeling relaxed. I'd like to take you through a little bit of this afternoon of what I'm seeing in Web3 at the moment. I thought it would be good to go through some general trends in the industry. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Robby. I'm the CEO of Animoca Brands. We are a game company, fundamentally. We make entertainment products. We make all sorts of games, from casual mobile games to AAA console-style games, from studios around the world, from Argentina to Australia and across Europe and Asia. We are also one of the most active investors in Web3, and a lot of people know us for our investment activity. And we have a portfolio of about 450 companies across a range of disciplines in the Web3 ecosystem. About half of that is infrastructure, and the other half is entertainment content, of which gaming is the biggest piece. So with that backdrop, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been noticing lately. And the first one, of course, is AI, right? I can't get up here and give you a speech in 2023 without mentioning AI at some point. But I wanted to talk about AI, not from the, AI is going to, take all our jobs and put us all out of work, from sort of fear-mongering media perspective. I wanted to just tell you how we're using AI in our business and how some of our portfolio companies are leveraging AI in the way in which we make games and how we think about the process of making games. So AI really came into the public consciousness about a year ago with stable diffusion and lots of generative art capabilities. And we started using this internally in our organization to generate 2D art assets at its most basic. That's what we do in games. Making art assets is a big part of the labor-intensive cost side of the business, so we started using that as a tool internally. But we started to see other potential use cases as well. And so this comes from a company called Blockade Labs. This is something called Skybox AI. And the idea here was, how do you think about leveraging AI in the content creation and visualization process? So when you think about narrative storytelling and you're creating a metaverse or an immersive MMO game, you're creating an alternative world and universe. And the old-fashioned way of doing this was storyboarding. We used to draw pictures and map it out, almost like an animation, and think about what this virtual world would look like. And then this became digitized over time. And now, thanks to AI, we can actually do this based on a text prompt. And so what Skybox AI does here is essentially allow you to make a no-code text prompt and generate an immersive 360-degree view of a world on demand. So when you're thinking about how you're going to tell stories, you could say, look, I wonder what it would look like in a medieval world with a blue sky. Well, you put in the text prompt, and there you go. And you can visualize this. And this tool is actually being used by tens of thousands of people around the world to create and visualize their work. And it becomes a huge time saver and creative tool for fueling your imagination, let's say. And it looks beautiful, too. So taking the next step beyond focusing just on the art side, this is how a company called Rosebud AI is thinking about the ability to generate code from something like a large language model. And so they've taken this one step further and not just generated art, but they're actually executing and compiling code to create games from simple text prompts. And so I'll give you an example here of a very simple game generated from a text prompt. So as you type in your prompt, it generates and executes the code, and then you decide, actually, that's a good start, but what I want to do is I want to customize it. I want to personalize it. I want to change the way it looks. What would it look like if I changed the shape of this, or I changed this attribute? So what this does is this essentially allows anybody to become a game developer, at least for making relatively simple games. So it greatly lowers the barrier to entry of creating simple games. And this will get, obviously, much more powerful and more complex over time. But I think that this is a great sort of canary in the coal mine, as we call it, to thinking about where game development may go in the future as we are able to use AI to do a lot of the heavy lifting of code generation, content generation, and graphic generation on our behalf. But we still need to give it guidance and tell it what to do. The last example I'll give you was inspired by a visit I made to an investee of ours called Clang Games, which you might be aware of because they're here in Germany, based in Berlin. And they were showing me a demo of how the MMO that they had created, Seed, was leveraging large language models, specifically ChatGPT, to create voices and personalities for their NPCs, NPCs being non-playable characters. So in games, you always have all these characters in the background, right? Either they're characters that you shoot in a first-person shooter, or they're characters in a Sims-like world that are just walking on the street. These are background characters, and they're generally autonomous robots. They just wander around doing the same things over and over again. But thanks to large language models, we're now able to give voices to these characters. We're able to give personalities to these characters that are not just scripted personalities, but these are personalities that will change and respond to you and respond to their environment in real time. And so what you're doing is you're actually, again, chipping away at that differential between reality and a virtual reality or an alternative reality. And for me as a game player, it actually changes somewhat the game experience, because I'm not just going in a linear path playing a game. I can stop and observe two pedestrians on the street getting into an argument. I can go in and participate in the argument with them, and they will respond to me, and we will have spontaneous conversations. And this becomes a lot more like the way I would actually interact with an environment in the physical world. And so I think, again, this is a fantastic sort of demonstration of how we can leverage AI to start creating game experiences that have much more reality from an interactivity point of view. Now, to go through a few things and trends in Web3, one of the big ones for this year is Web3 onboarding and middleware. So we've seen a huge emergence of companies focusing on building the Web3 tech stack and enabling developers to leverage SDKs and APIs to access everything from wallets to custody to on-chain minting tools, et cetera, and where all of these were divided into separate silos and you had to systems integrate yourself, to bring all these under one Web3 app. Now there are a lot of providers who are enabling these as kind of a turnkey solution. This will only increase and get better, and I think this is great for all of us, because while these may not necessarily be solutions appropriate for everybody, they will bring huge numbers of developers into the space, particularly in our segment of gaming, where Web2 game developers are interested with the idea of digital ownership. They're interested with the idea of deploying on blockchain, but they don't know how to approach it, and they're reluctant to hire, smart contract engineering teams, et cetera. And now we have a whole new class of middleware companies that are helping to bridge that gap. So that's a great trend. Another trend is AAA game development teams. One of the things that I get asked a lot is, when are the Web2 game developers going to come en masse into Web3? I think that's a little bit of a red herring in terms of a question, because one of the things that we typically observe in the game industry is that innovation in new platforms is generally driven by the companies that are native to those platforms. So when we think of mobile games, for example, we think of companies like Rovio with Angry Birds, or Supercell with Clash of Clans, or King with Candy Crush. All of these companies that made huge successes and big impacts in mobile gaming were not the giants of console gaming. They were native to the platform, and that's where the innovation took place. I think that will happen in Web3. However, it is great to see a lot of our friends from traditional, very established Web2 game companies coming into Web3 to build. So, like the team at CCP Games, who created EVE Online, arguably the most successful MMO of all time, creating EVE Frontier based on the universe and lore of the EVE world. our team at Life Beyond, who were the ones who built Assassin's Creed at Unity, coming on board to build a Web3 ecosystem, now leveraging actually ordinals and the Bitcoin ecosystem in Life Beyond, and so on and so on. So to see these teams now embracing the tools and potentials of Web3, I think is a great sign of recognition that Web3 is here to stay in terms of the gaming industry. Now, the last point, I guess, on technology that I wanted to talk about was interoperability. This is one of the things that, second to digital ownership, I think interoperability is one of the things that's very, very important about Web3 and Web3 gaming in particular. And it's because this is one of those features which I think really demonstrates the power of Web3 and demonstrates as a use case to players and customers why Web3 is so transformational compared to the way we used to build games. And this is because when you can have true digital ownership and the added benefit of interoperability, where I bring my items from place to place, from one game to another, this is something that you cannot do in traditional siloed games. And so we tried to do this first in the sandbox about 6 months ago, for those of you who might recall, in Sandbox Season 3, and this was the season of interoperability, we called it. And the idea here was to work with lots of well-known profile pick, PFP projects, and onboard those communities into the sandbox by recognizing them when they come to the sandbox, because they hold that PFP in their wallet, and giving them their own customized avatar in the sandbox voxelated art style based upon their PFP. And so this is a great way for you as a user. If I hold a Bored Ape or a World of Women NFT or a CyberKongs, I show up at the sandbox and automatically I get a character that looks like my PFP. It's personalized. That's meaningful to me. And it recognizes my community and my interest. And it's a great way to connect communities together. And in the Web 2 world, of gaming, what we would call that is user acquisition, right? It's just user acquisition. You're bringing in and welcoming new groups of users on board. And in this case, rather than paying for ads to bring them in, you're giving them utility for their NFTs in exchange for them coming and exploring your world and exploring your application. And this is one of those things that I constantly encourage our portfolio companies to be thinking about, particularly in this bear market, which is reaching out and doing collaborations and building interoperability does not really cost you much money, right? This is essentially free marketing, meaning that you build it and welcome these communities and they will come because they want to explore people who want to work with them and recognize their communities. And in Web3, this is very important. Recently, last week, we launched another idea on the same lines, which is a game called Rec League. It's a PvP fighting game, and it uses the lore and environment of the Bored Ape Yacht Club ecosystem. So those of you who recognize in the photo, the background is taken from the other side. And Bored Ape Yacht Club holders can come to the game and be recognized and treated as VIP customers and play the game based upon the fact that they come from that community. The game is powered by ApeCoin, so it leans into this idea of interoperability. And the beauty of Web3 is that because we're building on open and composable assets, we don't necessarily need to work hand in glove with Yuga Labs to do this. We're actually giving benefit to open assets, Bored Ape PFPs, and freely exchangeable tokens like ApeCoin to provide them with utility. And in exchange, they will come and be our customers. And the last example I'm going to use is from our racing ecosystem, because I think this is quite digestible for traditional gamers, which is we have a series of different game experiences based upon motorsports. And all of these game experiences accept the Rev token, which we use to incentivize players. We use it to reward players for esports, and they can use it to buy merchandise and NFTs and play in the game. And beyond that, we're working now to interconnect all of the content between these experiences as well, because we recognize the fact that people who love motorsports don't necessarily just like one flavor of motorsports. They might enjoy many different types, and they might like to bring their digital assets from place to place. So I can't leave, finally, without talking a little bit about regulation. In June, the SEC in the United States filed suits against Coinbase and Binance, and I think this has had a reasonably chilling effect on businesses in the US in Web3. It's made them reluctant, I think, to commit to at least short-term investment in the sector. And I've noticed that it's actually led to the flight of some capital and some teams outside of the US to look further abroad for their opportunities in Web3. I mean, anecdotally, tonight actually is the opening party for A16Z's first overseas office, which is in London, where their Web3 team will now sit, because they see the need to broaden their investment thesis for Web3 outside of the US, given the current regulatory climate. But beyond these actions from the SEC, we then saw regulation taking a turn in July. So the announcements around the Ripple case, I think, gave the community insight into the fact that maybe there was actually some legal precedent being created that would be more favorable to the Web3 community. But I think that this has been also a big distraction. And so for anybody who was in Singapore for Token 2049 in the last week, or read anything about what was going on there, you'll see that actually a lot of the activity now is really going on in Asia.
Thank you, Robby. We have to have a look at the time.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Robby Young.